NeoConservatives. The neoconservatives are a major intellectual faction within the Republican Party, defined by their belief in American exceptionalism, interventionist policy, and social moderation. Originating from anti-communist liberals who shifted rightward in the late 20th century, they helped shape the GOP's modern foreign policy identity. Early thinkers such as Irving Kristol and Norman Podhoretz laid the ideological foundation, while later political figures like Dick Cheney, Mike Pompeo, and Marco Rubio advanced their vision from within government. Neoconservatives argue that the United States has both a moral and strategic duty to defend democracy abroad and contain authoritarianism. They champion strong alliances, military readiness, and the projection of U.S. power to uphold global order. This worldview guided Ronald Reagan's anti-Soviet strategy and dominated George W. Bush's post-9/11 foreign policy, culminating in the Iraq War and the larger war on terror. On domestic policy, neoconservatives align with traditional fiscal conservatism, favoring free markets, low taxes, and deregulation, while supporting an active federal state for defense and moral leadership. Though their influence declined after the Iraq War and Donald Trump's rise, neoconservatives remain active through think tanks like AEI and the Hudson Institute, sustaining their vision of an assertive, globally engaged America. PaleoConservatives. PaleoConservatives are a traditionalist faction within the Republican Party that emphasizes cultural preservation, national sovereignty, and non-interventionist foreign policy. Emerging in the late 20th century as a reaction against neoconservative globalism and social liberalism, they advocate for a return to limited government, moral order, and American cultural identity. The most prominent figure associated with this movement is Pat Buchanan, whose America First campaigns in the 1990s embodied its ideals of protectionism, immigration restriction, and skepticism toward foreign wars. PaleoConservatives believe the United States should avoid ideological crusades abroad and focus instead on defending its borders, industries, and traditions. They view mass immigration, free trade, and cultural globalization as threats to national cohesion and social stability. Economically, they favor tariffs, local manufacturing, and opposition to corporate offshoring, seeing economic independence as essential to sovereignty. Culturally, PaleoCons stress Christian values, family life, and Western civilization, regarding modern liberalism and multiculturalism as corrosive to America's moral foundation. Though marginalized for decades by both the establishment and neoconservative wings, their ideas on nationalism and cultural identity heavily influenced the rhetoric of the Trump era. Today, paleoconservatism survives as a quieter but enduring current in the GOP, shaping debates on immigration, trade, and the limits of American power abroad. Establishment Republicans. Establishment Republicans represent the institutional core of the GOP, the politicians, donors, and strategists who have long dominated its national infrastructure. Rooted in the party's post-war traditions, they emphasize fiscal conservatism, pro-business policies, and international stability. Their outlook is pragmatic rather than ideological, seeking to maintain economic growth, corporate confidence, and party unity. Figures such as Mitch McConnell, Mitt Romney, and John Thune embody this faction's cautious and managerial style of governance. This faction prioritizes tax cuts, deregulation, and free trade, viewing economic liberalization as the foundation of American strength. Abroad, they generally favor a strong but measured U.S. presence, supporting NATO and global alliances while avoiding the unilateral boldness associated with neoconservatives. They often serve as mediators within the GOP, balancing the demands of populist and libertarian wings with those of corporate and defense interests. In power, establishment Republicans focus on maintaining stability and electability, relying on major donors, corporate lobbies, and the party's traditional voter base of Christians, middle-class moderates, and business owners. Though increasingly challenged by Trumpist populism, this faction continues to wield substantial influence in Congress, national committees, and major fundraising networks, ensuring continuity within the Republican governing establishment. Libertarians. Libertarians within the Republican Party advocate for maximum personal freedom, minimal government intervention, and social liberalism. Rooted in classical liberal and Austrian economic ideology, they view individual liberty and free markets as the highest political goods. This faction opposes expansive federal power, mass surveillance, and most forms of taxation or welfare spending, believing that private enterprise and voluntary exchange produce better outcomes than state control. Prominent figures such as Rand Paul, Thomas Massie, and the late Ron Paul have carried libertarian principles into modern GOP politics. Their supporters tend to be technocrats, small business owners, and independent-minded conservatives skeptical of both establishment bureaucracy and populist nationalism. Libertarians champion free trade, deregulation, and sound monetary policy, while promoting non-interventionism abroad, rejecting long-term wars, and calling for restrained foreign engagement. They strongly defend civil liberties and gun rights, arguing that the Second Amendment is essential to personal autonomy and protection against government tyranny. This stance aligns them with much of the Republican base, though their consistency on privacy, drug reform, and same-sex marriage often sets them apart from social conservatives. While they hold limited institutional power, Libertarians exert substantial ideological influence, keeping alive the GOP's traditional focus on limited government, fiscal responsibility, and the primacy of individual rights in both domestic and foreign affairs. Trumpists. The Trumpists, often referred to as the Make America Great Again movement, form the dominant populist faction within today's Republican Party. Emerging with Donald Trump's 2016 campaign, they reshaped the GOP around nationalism, cultural grievance, and working-class identity. Rejecting globalism, free trade, and traditional party elites, Trumpists emphasize America First economics, strict immigration enforcement, and skepticism toward international institutions such as NATO and the United Nations. Politically, this faction blends economic populism with social conservatism. They support tariffs, reshoring American industry, and restricting immigration, while fiercely opposing what they see as left-wing overreach on issues like race, gender, and education. Figures such as Donald Trump, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Matt Gaetz represent different strands of this movement, ranging from populist nationalism to hard-right activism. In power, Trumpists favor a combative, personality-driven style of governance, prioritizing loyalty over ideology and framing politics as a battle against a corrupt elite. They have shifted the GOP's tone from corporate conservatism to populist insurgency, appealing to blue-collar voters and rural communities traditionally outside the party's base. Though controversial and polarizing, the Trumpist faction has effectively redefined Republican identity, making populism the party's central force in the 20s. New Right. The New Right is an emerging faction within the Republican Party that combines populist nationalism, social conservatism, and authoritarianism. It arose after 2016 as a response to both libertarian economics and establishment globalism, seeking to create a conservatism that prioritizes nation, family, and community over corporate and elite interests. This faction's leading figures include J.D. Vance, Pete Hegseth, and intellectual ideologies tied to the Claremont Institute, Silicon Valley, and the emerging far right. The New Right argues that the state should not remain neutral in moral or economic life, but instead act to protect the cultural and material foundations of the nation. They advocate for industrial policy, tariffs, and antitrust enforcement to restrain corporate monopolies and promote domestic production. Socially, they support policies that encourage family formation, restrict abortion and gender ideology, and reinforce traditional religious and civic norms. In foreign policy, the New Right leans toward realism and restraint, rejecting neoconservative interventionism while maintaining a strong national defense. They see the globalist consensus as having weakened American sovereignty and hollowed out the middle class. Though still developing and intertwined with Trump, the New Right represents an attempt to redefine conservatism for a post-globalization era, one that blends moral traditionalism with populist economics, aiming to create a working-class, culturally grounded Republican identity for the future.